Her mom's advice destroyed her marriage. Then she took him for herself. The Gilded Cage. The Lagos skyline at dusk was a symphony of ambition, a jagged tapestry of glittering glass and steel etched against a feverish orange sky. From the 62nd floor, the city's chaos was transformed into a silent, sparkling diorama. The honking danfos, the teeming markets, the smoky scent of roadside suya, all were swallowed by the impeccable vacuum of the penthouse. Here, the only sound was the almost imperceptible hum of money, the whisper of central air, the soft pulse of hidden lighting, the silent vigil of a multimillionaire view. Adesawa Mitchell stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, a silhouette of exquisite loneliness. Her reflection was a portrait of conquered time. At 50, her figure was honed by private trainers, her skin a story of Swiss clinics and Korean serums, her dreadlocks, interwoven with threads of genuine gold, cascading down a spine held rigid with the discipline of a queen. She wore couture silk the color of midnight, and on her wrist, a Bulgari timepiece worth more than the annual salary of every employee on 2 floors of the building below. She was the founder and sole owner of Lux Africa, a cosmetics empire built on the alchemy of shea butter and aspiration. She was, by every measurable metric, a titan. And she was utterly, desolately empty. The vast open-plan living area behind her was a masterpiece of minimalist design, curated by an interior architect from Milan. It was all cool travertine, bespoke rosewood, and a single, monumental piece of a Blade Glover art exploding with color on the far wall. It was devoid of clutter, of life, of the warm, forgiving mess of human habitation. There were no forgotten magazines, no stray coffee cups, no child's toys underfoot. The only photograph was a large, silver-framed image on the grand piano, a younger Adesawa, accepting the Entrepreneur of the Year award, her smile brilliant and brittle. 25 years. That was the ghost that lived here with her. A quarter-century since her husband, Tund, had quietly closed the door of their modest Surelier flat for the last time. She could still see him, not as he might be now, but as he was then, a man with eyes the color of rich soil, whose patience was as deep and steady as the Niger. He was an engineer who built bridges, literal ones, and had tried to build them figuratively between their 2 warring hearts. She had been the wrecking ball. She had mistaken his calm for complacency, his willingness to listen for weakness. Her own intelligence, sharp and gleaming, had become a weapon she used to win every argument, to dissect every opinion of his until it lay in tatters. She needed to be right more than she needed to be loved. She had demanded respect while offering none, believing her fiery spirit was something he should worship, not something he should be forced to endure. She called it strength. He called it cruelty. The night he left, there had been no dramatic scene, just a weary finality in his voice that had cut through her shouting. Adesawa, you have built a fortress around yourself, he had said, his voice so soft it silenced her. And you are the only prisoner inside it. I am laying down my siege. I am going. He took a single suitcase. The divorce settlement, which she had fought for with vicious legal precision, had been the seed capital for Lux Africa. She had turned the ashes of her marriage into a billion-dollar empire. She had proven, to the world and to his ghost, that she didn't need him. But oh, how the fortress ached. A tear, hot and shocking, traced a path through her perfectly applied foundation. She never cried. Crying was for the weak, for those who had not mastered their world. Yet here, in the impregnable tower of her own making, she cried for the man who had brought her a cup of tea without being asked, for the man who had listened to her frantic dreams of a business with a quiet smile and said, I believe you can do anything. He had been her first believer, and she had fired him for the crime of not being a loud enough cheerleader. Her loneliness was not the common kind. It was a luxury brand of isolation. It was attending charity galas where everyone knew her name and no one knew her soul. It was boardrooms full of men who deferred to her with a mixture of fear and resentment. It was lovers, few, discreet, and ultimately transactional, who were drawn to the power and the perfume, but fled from the harsh, demanding reality of her. They wanted a billionaire, not a woman. Her only tether to something real was Amara. Her brilliant, beautiful Amara, who had her father's kind eyes and, Adesawa feared, her own capacity for self-destruction. Amara, who had chosen David. David, the thought of him was a fresh, peculiar pang. He was not a billionaire. He was an architect, successful but not stratospheric. He lived in a warm, book-filled house in Victoria Island, not a sterile penthouse. He drove a sensible SUV, and he looked at Amara with a devotion so plain, so unguarded, it made Adesawa's breath catch. It was the look Tund had given her before she had taught him to hide it. Last week, she had dined with them. David had cooked a simple but perfect ifo riro with smoked turkey. He had moved around Amara in the kitchen with an easy, unconscious grace, taking a knife from her hand to chop the peppers, refilling her water glass before it was empty. It was a dance of quiet care, a language of love spoken in actions, not grand declarations. And Amara, her Amara, had accepted it as her due, with a casual smile. She didn't see the treasure she held. A corrosive envy, more potent than any she had felt in a boardroom battle, rose in Adesawa's throat. It wasn't jealousy of her daughter. It was jealousy for her daughter. It was the agonizing sight of a person standing knee-deep in cool, clear water, complaining of thirst, while she, Adesawa, was dying of drought in a desert of her own creation. That should be mine. The thought was clear, cold, and shocking in its clarity. Not Amara's life, but that quality of love, that peace, that second chance. She turned from the window, her reflection ghosting over the now black lagoon below. The empty splendor of the penthouse pressed in on her. This was her kingdom, silent, polished, and profoundly worthless. She had spent a lifetime acquiring, building, conquering. She had everything the world told her to want, and it had left her with nothing but a ghost in a gold-plated cage, yearning for the simple, solid warmth of a good man's hand on hers, the very hand she had once spurned and which now held her daughters. Later, as David cleared the plates, Amara went to take a call. Adesawa found herself alone in the kitchen with him. He was at the sink, rinsing a plate before putting it in the dishwasher. His movements were economical, thoughtful. "You have a beautiful home, David," she said, the words feeling inadequate. "It's just a house," he said, smiling over his shoulder. "Amara makes it a home. She has that gift." He said it with such plain, unadorned certainty. It was a statement of fact, not flattery. He picked up a delicate crystal wine glass Amara had used, one from a set Adesawa had given them. Instead of placing it in the dishwasher, he took a soft cloth and began to hand wash it, his fingers cradling the bowl with a surgeon's care. "That one's special," he said softly, almost to himself. "She loves these. Says they feel like celebration." He rinsed it under clear water, holding it up to the light to check for spots. The care he took was a sacrament. It was love, made visible in the most mundane act. In that moment, the last of Adesawa's defenses shattered. The envy wasn't just a pang anymore. It was a tsunami. It wasn't that she wanted David. She wanted what he represented. She wanted to be the one for whom a good man willingly, quietly, washed the crystal. She wanted to be the reason for that focused tenderness, that unshakable respect. She had spent decades building an empire everyone could see, and he was here, building a sanctuary only two people could feel, and it was infinitely more valuable. The ghost of her past wasn't just at the feast. It was pulling up a chair, whispering in her ear with the voice of her own profound regret. "You had this. You threw this away. And now she has it, and she doesn't even fully see its worth." As David placed the sparkling, perfect glass on the drying rack, Adesawa's heart calcified around a new, terrible resolve. The gentle, observing envy crystallized into something sharp, strategic, and cold. If this kind of peace could not be reclaimed from her own past, perhaps it could be repurposed from the present. The sight of his hands, so careful with what was precious, became the final catalyst. She would have to teach Amara to see that care as something less. She would have to create a vacancy in this warm, happy kitchen. She left the house that night carrying the scent of stew and goodwill, but her soul was ice. The ghost had not just visited. It had taken up residence, and it had a plan. The seed of envy. The image of David's hands, cradling the crystal glass under the stream of water, became a tormenting loop in Odessa's mind. It replayed during the silent glide of the elevator up to her penthouse, the care in his touch a stark indictment of her own empty, manicured existence. In her bedroom, a cavern of marble and silk, she stood before a mirror more vast than the entire kitchen she had just left. She saw a monument, not a woman. Her own hands, adorned with a flawless 5-carat diamond solitaire and a gold signet ring bearing the Lux Africa crest, looked like artifacts in a museum. Beautiful, cold, and utterly disconnected from the pulse of life. They signed million-dollar contracts, pointed at quarterly reports, dismissed incompetent managers with a flick. They did not wash glasses. They did not smooth worry from a loved one's brow. They had not been held with that specific, grounding tenderness in 25 years. The envy that had taken root during dinner blossomed now into a full, choking vine. It wasn't a simple, malicious jealousy. It was a profound, existential yearning. David's quiet act was a language she had forgotten, a dialect of love spoken in service, in attention to the fragile things. He wasn't just washing a dish. He was honoring Amara's joy, preserving a vessel of celebration. When was the last time anyone had treated anything of Odessa's, or Odessa herself, with that kind of sacred care? Lovers brought gifts, employees brought results, sycophants brought flattery. No one brought a quiet, knowing stewardship of her heart. She thought of Tund. The memories, usually kept in a locked vault of regret, flooded out. He used to massage her feet after her long, early days selling beauty products from the boot of her car. He would listen to her grandiose plans for a shop, then a chain, then an empire, and instead of mocking her ambition, he would ask practical questions about supply chains. He was her first sounding board, her comm center, and she, in her frantic drive to be seen as a force, had mistaken his stability for stagnation. She had belittled his small dreams, his contentment with building honest structures and a peaceful home. She had wanted a co-conspirator in conquest, not an anchor in calm waters. She had demanded he be a roaring bonfire to match her own flames, not understanding that he was the hearth, the steady, warming source that could last a lifetime. She had chosen the empire, and the empire had given her everything but a reason to get up in the morning. Now, she saw the hearth glowing in her daughter's home, and the cold of her own cavernous space became unbearable. The logic of her mind, sharpened by decades of boardroom battles and market analysis, began to apply itself to this new, painful problem. It was a problem of assets, of acquisition, of strategic positioning. Asset, David's capacity for loyal, respectful, nurturing love. An undervalued asset in the current emotional marketplace, where flash and transaction ruled. Holder, Amara, who, in her youthful naivete, viewed this asset as a baseline, a given, not the rare masterpiece it was. Desiring entity, herself, a bankrupt entity in emotional terms, possessing vast material wealth but a critical deficit in the very commodity David offered. A cold, crystalline clarity settled over her grief. She could not simply take the social friction, the moral weight. Even she had some limits, and the direct approach was impossibly crude. But what if the asset became available? What if the current holder was persuaded to divest? The plan did not announce itself with a villain's chuckle, but with the silent click of a business solution falling into place. It was a hostile takeover of the heart, and it would require the most delicate, ruthless mergers and acquisitions strategy of her life. Amara was the key, her brilliant, strong-willed daughter, who adored her but also subconsciously feared ending up like her, alone at the top. Amara had always sought her approval, her hard-won wisdom. Adesawa had always preached a gospel of uncompromising strength, of never settling. It was a gospel born of the pain Tun's departure had caused, but one she had framed as the secret to her success. She had never confessed that her success was the brittle consolation prize for her catastrophic failure. Now, she would weaponize that gospel. She would not tell Amara to leave David. That would be too obvious, too resistant. She would begin, instead, to subtly reappraise him, to frame his virtues as liabilities through the lens of her own warped experience. His calm, not strength, but a lack of passionate investment. His respect, not love, but a polite distance. His support, not devotion, but an absence of his own demanding ambition. She would teach Amara to see the hearth as a weak, placid fire, and to yearn for a dangerous, exciting inferno, an inferno like the one that had left Adesawa with ashes. She walked to the penthouse window again. The city glittered, a circuit board of ambition. Down there, in that warm, book-filled house, was a man who represented everything she had learned to crave only after it was eternally out of reach. But was it? The ruthless entrepreneur in her saw not a closed door, but a complex deal structure. The heartbroken woman in her saw a last chance for redemption, however twisted the path. The seed of envy, watered by regret, had now put down a dark, determined root. It would grow in the shadows, fed by strategic words and manufactured doubts. Its aim was not to destroy her daughter's happiness out of spite, but to carefully disassemble it, hoping that when the pieces fell, she, Adesawa, might be there to gather up the most valuable one for herself. She would become the architect of a divorce, and then, if the strategy held, the beneficiary of its aftermath. Turning from the view, she caught her own reflection in the dark glass, a powerful, lonely ghost framed by a kingdom of nothing. A faint, tragic smile touched her lips. The most important deal of her life was beginning. The pitch would be love. The product was a man's heart, and the target was her own daughter. Rewriting the past. The campaign began not with a declaration of war, but with a carefully curated confession. Adesawa understood that the most potent poison was often distilled from a grain of truth. She invited Amara to lunch at the Sky restaurant, perched atop the very hotel that housed Lux Africa's flagship spa. Below them, Lagos sprawled like a demanding lover. But up here, all was chilled champagne and the soft clink of porcelain. "You look radiant, NWAM," Adesawa began, her eyes appraising Amara's simple linen dress with a warmth that felt almost genuine. "Marriage agrees with you." She let the statement hang, a hook baited with approval. Amara glowed, smoothing her napkin. "It does, Mama. He's just easy, you know? It's not complicated." "Easy," Adesawa repeated, the word a delicate specimen she turned over in the light. She took a slow sip of mineral water. "Your father was easy." Amara stilled. Discussions of Tund were rare, the subject a shadowy continent on the map of their history. Was he? Oh yes. Adesawa's smile was wistful, expertly crafted. Too easy, perhaps. He was a good man. A kind man. Like your David. She let her gaze drift to the horizon, as if watching a memory play out on the skyline. But kindness in a man, it can sometimes be a mask for something else. A lack of conviction, a fear of true depth. Amara's fork hesitated over her salad. "What do you mean?" Adesawa sighed, a sound of weary, hard-won wisdom. "A lion does not spend its time tending to the den, NWAM. It hunts. It roars. It defends its territory with fire. Your father, he was content to be the den. Warm, safe, predictable." She looked back at Amara, her eyes sharpening. "I was the storm. I had visions, ambition, a fire in my belly that needed fuel, not a blanket. He found my fire, overwhelming. In the end, he called it disrespect. I called it a fundamental mismatch of spirit." She was rewriting history in real time, airbrushing her own culpability. The memory of her own scathing insults, her contempt for Tun's small dreams, her relentless need to be right. All of it was filtered through this new, self-serving narrative. She was no longer the woman who drove a good man away. She was the majestic storm a gentle man could not weather. So you think, David is like that? Amara's voice was smaller now, a flicker of doubt kindled. I think he is a good man, Adesawa said carefully, layering the praise with a subtle qualifier. A very good man. But is good enough for a Mitchell woman? We are not wired for simple contentment. We are wired for conquest. Your father was good, and look where it left us. Look where it left me. She didn't say alone. She didn't have to. The unspoken word vibrated in the space between them, underscored by the staggering wealth of their surroundings. Proof, her posture said, that her path, however lonely, was the superior one. But Mama, you're successful because of that. Because you chose your path. Exactly. Adesawa leaned forward, her diamonds catching the light. I chose. I did not settle. I refused to make myself smaller to fit the calm life a good man offered. And yes, it is lonely at the top. But it is better to be lonely in a palace. She gestured gracefully to the panoramic view, than to be stifled in a cozy little hut, wondering what you could have been. The metaphor was deliberate, brutal. The cozy little hut was Amara's warm, book-filled home. The palace was this sterile height. Adesawa was offering her daughter a terrible choice. Become like me, strong, lonely, glorious, or become like him, soft, content, small. Over the next weeks, the stories evolved. In snippets during phone calls, over glasses of wine on the penthouse terrace, Adesawa painted a new portrait of her past. Tun's patience became passivity. His thoughtful silence became emotional absence. His decision to leave, the ultimate act of self-preservation against her toxicity, was reframed as his ultimate failure. He hadn't been strong enough to handle a truly powerful woman. He wanted a wife who would ask how high. When he said jump, Adesawa said one evening, her voice tinged with a practiced, regal sadness. I was a woman who asked why, and then built my own ladder to a higher platform. He found it disrespectful. I found it breathing. Each shared truth was a surgical incision, carefully placed to separate Amara from the security of David's love. Adesawa never attacked David directly. That would have raised defenses. Instead, she attacked the idea of him. She attacked the version of herself that had once valued and lost a man like him. She was teaching Amara to view David's goodness not as the foundation for a lasting partnership, but as the warning sign of a future diminishment. Amara began to listen differently. When David calmly suggested they save for a family holiday rather than splurge on a designer handbag, she heard an echo of her mother's words, a lack of grand vision. When he chose to mediate a dispute with a neighbor rather than confront, she saw the fear of fire her mother described. The seed of doubt, planted over an exquisite lunch, was now sprouting, its roots seeking cracks in the solid ground of her marriage. Adesawa watched the progress with a mix of grim satisfaction and haunting guilt. She saw her daughter's eyes, once so clear and sure when they looked at David, now cloud with a new, critical analysis. She was succeeding. She was turning Amara into a younger version of herself, a woman primed to see love as a negotiation, respect as a trophy to be withheld, and a good man's heart as a territory not quite worth the effort of peaceful occupation. The past was no longer a land of regret for Adesawa. It was a quarry from which she mined the very stones she would use to build a new future. She had rewritten her history into a cautionary tale, and in the telling, she was convincing her daughter to abandon the one thing she herself desperately wanted to steal back, the unwavering devotion of a good man. The ghost of Tund, she thought, must be shaking his head in whatever peaceful afterlife he had found. But Adesawa had stopped listening to ghosts. She was too busy building a new story, one where she got to win, this time. The language of value. Adesawa understood that words were one weapon, but spectacle was another. To fully reshape Amara's expectations, she needed to create a visible, tangible chasm between the world she represented and the world David could provide. She needed to teach her daughter a new dialect of affection, one spoken in the cold, hard currency of high luxury. The first lesson came on Amar's birthday. David, a man who paid attention, had planned a perfect, personal celebration. He'd taken the day off work. He cooked her an elaborate breakfast in bed, plantain pancakes with a special ginger-infused syrup he'd spent weeks perfecting. The gift, waiting on the tray, was a beautifully crafted leather-bound sketchbook, its cover embossed with a delicate line drawing of their first home. Inside, on the first page, he had written, "For the dreams you haven't even drawn yet. I can't wait to see them." It was thoughtful, intimate, and spoke directly to Amara's soul as an architect. Amara was deeply touched. When she called her mother, voice warm with sleep and happiness, she described the morning. "He made the syrup, Mama. And the sketchbook, it's so him. So perfect." Adesawa listened, her silence heavy on the line. "That sounds lovely, NWAM," she said, the pause before lovely speaking volumes. "A homemade syrup. How quaint." The word quaint landed like a dull thud. Later that afternoon, a black Lux Africa SUV pulled up to Amara's house. A uniformed assistant emerged, carrying a robin's egg blue box tied with a white silk ribbon. Inside, nestled on a bed of dove-gray velvet, was a bracelet. Not just any bracelet. It was a Cartier Panther, its sleek, predatory form crafted from white gold and paved with brilliant cut diamonds, the eyes two piercing emeralds. It was a statement of ferocious, untamable elegance. It cost more than David's car. The note card, in Adesawa's flawless script, read, "For my own fierce panther. Never let the world make you tame. Love, Mama." Amara held it, the weight of it shocking, both physically and metaphorically. She slipped it on. It glittered with a cold, alien fire on her wrist, utterly incongruous with her yoga pants and David's old sweatshirt. She looked from the exquisite, impersonal luxury on her arm to the humble, perfect sketchbook on the table. One screamed value in a language the whole world understood. The other whispered it in a private code only two people shared. When David came home, he saw it immediately. His eyes flickered to the bracelet, then to her face. "That's quite something. From your mom." "Yes," Amara said, an inexplicable defensiveness rising in her. "It's a panther." He nodded slowly, a faint, unreadable smile on his lips. "It suits her vision of you." He didn't say it suited his vision of her. He kissed her forehead and went to shower, leaving Amara staring at the two gifts, feeling a strange, unsettled dissonance. The pattern was established. For their wedding anniversary, David booked a long weekend at a beautiful, secluded eco-lodge in the Obudu Plateau, a place Amara had always wanted to visit. He planned hikes, stargazing, uninterrupted time together. Adesawa's gift arrived the day before they left. 2 first-class tickets to Paris and a reservation at the Ritz. "Every queen deserves a throne, if only for a week," the note said. The implied contrast was brutal. A rustic mountain retreat versus the city of light. A thoughtful, shared experience versus a lavishly curated public spectacle. Amara found herself in the painful position of having to choose, and in doing so, rank the expressions of love. David, the Paris trip, it's once in a lifetime. The lodge will always be there. He looked at her, his expression calm, but his eyes deeply wounded. "I planned this for us. For the peace and quiet you said you craved." "I know, and it's sweet," she said, using the word that now felt like a gentle dagger, thanks to her mother. "But this is Paris." They went to Paris. Adesawa had arranged a personal shopper at Dior, a private dinner at Le Jules Verne in the Eiffel Tower. Amara posted pictures, feeling glamorous and important. David was a gracious tourist, but a quiet distance had settled between them. The trip was a performance, and he felt like a supporting actor in his own marriage. The final, most insidious lesson came on an ordinary Tuesday. David came home with a small, wrapped package. "Saw this and thought of you," he said, a shy hope in his eyes. It was a delicate silver necklace, its pendant a tiny, perfect geometric rendering of a climbing rose, its stem forming it was from a young, independent Nigerian jeweler whose work Amara admired. It was unique, meaningful, and represented a significant portion of his fun money for the month. Amara's heart melted. For a moment, the mother's static faded. "David, it's beautiful. I love it." She wore it that evening. The next day, Adesawa took her to lunch. Her hawk eyes didn't miss the new pendant. "What a charming little piece," she said, reaching out to touch it with a manicured finger. "Local artisan?" "Yes, David got it for me." "How thoughtful." Adesawa's smile didn't reach her eyes. That afternoon, she took Amara directly to her jeweler in the VIP lounge of a high-end mall. A woman's jewelry box should tell the story of her value, Adesawa declared, as the discreet attendant laid out trays. She selected a pair of Harry Winston diamond cluster earrings, each stone catching the light like a captured star. "These," she said, fastening them onto Amara's ears, "are not charming. They are a declaration. They say you are to be taken seriously. They say you cannot be afforded by just anyone." As Amara looked in the mirror, the simple silver at her throat was utterly annihilated by the blinding scintillation at her ears. One was a whisper of personal love. The other was a megaphone blaring market worth. Her mother's lesson was complete. In the economy of affection, David's currency was sentimental and weak. Her mother's was powerful, durable, and legible to everyone. That night, David noticed the earrings. He said nothing, but when he kissed her goodnight, it was on the cheek, not the lips. The chasm Adesawa had been engineering was no longer just conceptual. It was there, glittering on Amara's ears, a silent, deafening reproach to his humble, heartfelt silver. He was beginning to understand the language he was being measured against, and he knew he could never, and would never, speak it. The valuation had been set, and he was found desperately wanting. The poison lexicon. The transformation in Amara's perception was now self-sustaining. Adesawa no longer needed to plant every doubt. She had provided the dictionary, and Amara was learning to translate her marriage through its newly poisoned pages. It began to color everything. A quiet evening at home, which once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a sentence. David would be reading a novel, his body relaxed in his favorite armchair, a soft pool of light from the lamp haloing his head. He would hum absently, a habit she'd once found endearing. Now, Adesawa's voice echoed in her mind. A man with real drive doesn't have time to just sit. Contentment is the enemy of ambition. Amara would look at his peaceful profile and feel not love, but a restless, prickling frustration. Was this all there was? This quiet? Where was the fire, the hunger her mother said was essential? His calm in the face of her newly provoked storms was the greatest source of reinterpretation. Before the poisoning, she had seen it as stability, a safe harbor she could rage against without fear of capsizing. Now, she saw it through Adesawa's lens of strategic contempt. One Friday, Amara came home tense from a fraught client meeting. David, sensing her mood, had run her a bath with lavender salts and had a glass of wine waiting. "Tough day?" he asked, his voice a gentle invitation to vent. Instead of relaxing into his care, Adesawa's vocabulary rose in her throat. "He is pacifying you. Like one quiets a fussing child. Does he see you as an equal, with real problems, or as a mood to be managed?" "So you think my work problems are just me being fussy?" Amara snapped, shrugging off his hand on her shoulder. David blinked, taken aback. "No, of course not. I just thought you might want to unwind before talking about it." Unwind? Or avoid? Maybe if you had more challenging work, you'd understand that some things can't be washed away with bath salts, she retorted, the cruelty of the words shocking even her as she said them. She was testing him, prodding the beast her mother insisted lay dormant beneath his calm. But David didn't roar. He didn't bite back. He just looked at her, a profound weariness deepening the lines around his eyes. He picked up his own glass of water. I'm going to work on the plans for the library extension in the study. Join me when you feel like talking. He left the room with a quiet dignity. To Amara, steeped in her mother's doctrine, this was proof positive. See? No fire. No fight. A real man would engage. He would demand your respect by matching your intensity. He just retreats. That's not peace. NWAM. That's surrender. His consensus building, once a pillar of their partnership, became indecisiveness. When they debated whether to invest in solar panels for the house, David wanted to get 3 quotes, talk to neighbors who had them, weigh the long-term savings against the upfront cost. Amara, fueled by a new impatience, wanted to just choose the best brand and do it. Why do you need a committee to make every decision? She sighed, exasperated. It's so bureaucratic. Making a big financial decision isn't bureaucracy, Amara. It's prudence, he said calmly. Prudence is just a fancy word for fear, she shot back, parroting a phrase she'd heard her mother use about a hesitant board member. His refusal to engage in social one-upmanship was reinterpreted as a lack of ambition. At a party with some of Amara's more affluent, networking-focused friends from the architecture world, a brash developer boasted about a new multi-billion-naira deal. David listened politely, asked a few thoughtful questions about the environmental impact assessments, and then moved on to talk to a retired painter in the corner about local bird species. Later, in the car, Amara fumed. Did you see how Tony was holding court? That's the kind of energy that gets things done in this city. And you were in the corner talking about kingfishers. David glanced at her. Tony is a blowhard who will probably bankrupt his investors. The painter has lived here for 70 years and knows more about the real Lagos than Tony ever will. Which conversation had more value? Value isn't always about quiet wisdom, David. It's about presence, power. You have to show people what you're made of, she insisted, her mother's voice fully colonizing her own. Maybe I don't need to show strangers what I'm made of, he said quietly, his eyes on the road. Maybe I'd rather just be what I'm made of, for the people who matter. But Amara was no longer sure she was one of those people. The lexicon had separated them. Words that once meant safety, calm, prudent, steady, now meant weak, fearful, unambitious. Words her mother celebrated. Fire, power, dominance, felt like foreign, thrilling ideals she needed to manifest, and David's inability to reflect them back felt like a personal failing on his part. The most tragic corruption was the word respect. Adesawa had taught her that respect was not given, it was seized. It was the glittering trophy you won by withholding your own. So Amara began to withhold. She stopped consulting him on minor household decisions. She made plans with friends on weekends he'd hoped they'd spend together, informing him at the last minute. She interrupted him more frequently, her tone edged with a dismissive impatience when he explained technical details of his work. Each time, she watched him, a morbid part of her hoping for the explosion, the confrontation that would prove her mother right, that a real man was in there, waiting to be provoked into existence. But the explosion never came. There was only a gradual dimming, a quiet retreat of his spirit. He spent more time at his drafting table, the light under his study door burning later into the night. The distance between them in their own home grew physical, measured in silent dinners and separate bedtimes. Amara, in her twisted quest for a respect she could feel as a victory, was systematically destroying the effortless, mutual respect that had been the bedrock of their love. She was speaking a harsh, demanding language, and David, a man of gentle syntax and thoughtful pauses, was falling silent, unable and unwilling to learn it. The poison had reached the core. The dictionary was complete, and every entry defined a way in which the good man she married was now, somehow, not enough. Dismantling in progress. The blueprint was complete. Amara was no longer a student learning the lexicon. She was now the foreman on the demolition site of her own marriage, wielding her mother's poisoned tools with a grim, determined proficiency. The quiet life she had once cherished now felt like an open field where her ambition should be building skyscrapers, not a cozy home. She began with the small, structural beams of their daily life, shared rituals. The Saturday morning market runs, where they'd bicker playfully over plantains and buy small chops from their favorite vendor, were abandoned. "It's inefficient," she declared, ordering groceries from an upscale service that delivered in chilled, branded boxes. David would find the exotic, packaged greens in the fridge, and the absence of the lively, sticky-fingered chaos of their old routine felt like a silent rebuke. His acts of service, once the glue of their affection, were now reframed as evidence of his limited scope. He noticed her favorite pen was running out and bought a box of refills. She found them on her desk. "You could have just reminded me to order them myself," she said, her tone not grateful, but mildly inconvenienced. "I have a system for these things." He had crossed from being thoughtful to encroaching on her self-sufficiency, a sin in her new doctrine. The dismantling moved to their social architecture. She accepted invitations to high-powered gallery openings and industry mixers, often at the last minute, presenting them to David as unavoidable obligations. "Chinua Kinojo will be there. She's a gateway to the entire Eco-Atlantic redesign consortium. You understand." He would offer to come, to be her plus one. "It's really a networking thing," she'd demur, a subtle wince in her expression. "It'll be boring for you. All shop talk." The message was clear. The world she was moving in had no place for a man who found value in conversations about kingfishers. He began to stop asking. The most calculated dismantling was reserved for their private language of love. David was a physical man, not in grand gestures, but in a constant, low current of connection. A hand on the small of her back as they passed in the hallway. A kiss placed on her temple while she was reading. His fingers seeking hers under the dinner table. These were the invisible threads that had woven them together. Amara began to sever them, thread by thread. She would subtly shift her back away from his touch. She would turn her head so the temple kiss landed awkwardly on her hair. She would keep her hands busy when he sought them. She didn't pull away with drama, but with a cool, preoccupied detachment that was far more devastating. She was deconstructing their intimacy brick by brick and calling it maintaining her own space. One evening, the dismantling turned verbal and direct. David had been offered a prestigious, quiet role consulting on a national heritage project, a dream job for him, focusing on preserving historic buildings. It was meaningful, impactful, but not flashy. He was thrilled, and he shared the news over dinner, his eyes alight with a passion she hadn't seen in weeks. "The pay isn't corporate level, of course," he said, "but the chance to save some of these old places from the wrecking ball. Amara, it's what I've always wanted to do." Amara put down her fork. She heard her mother's voice, clear as a bell. "Heritage? That's a hobby for retired professors, not a career for a man with a family to build. Where's the growth? Where is the forward momentum? Is it a permanent position?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "It's a 3-year project, likely to be extended." "It's solid. 3 years." She nodded slowly, as if computing a disappointing sum. "And after that, you'll be what, 40? Specializing in old buildings in a country that only wants to build new ones." She saw the light in his eyes gutter like a candle in a sudden draft. "David, it's a beautiful sentiment. Truly. But is it a strategy? Where's the equity? The partnership track? This feels like a lateral move. At best." The silence that followed was the sound of a bridge collapsing. He stared at her, the offer letter seeming to wilt in his hand. "A lateral move," he repeated, his voice hollow. "This is my life's work, Amara, not a corporate ladder. That's the problem. she said, the words leaving her lips coated in a frost she didn't even know she could conjure. Life's work should build something that lasts, not just preserve what's already fading. He didn't argue. He just folded the letter carefully and placed it beside his plate. The rest of the meal passed in a silence so profound it seemed to suck the air from the room. That night, he didn't come to bed. She lay awake, her heart pounding with a perverse adrenaline. This is it, she thought. This is the challenge. Now he will have to fight for his vision. Now he will show me his fire. But the next morning, he was just quiet. Terribly, defeatedly quiet. He made coffee, handed her a cup, and went to his study. There was no fire, no fight, only a deep, quiet sorrow. And in that moment, a sliver of Amara's old self, the one who loved him, cracked through the facade and felt a jolt of terror. This wasn't a victory. This was an eradication. She wasn't provoking a stronger man to emerge. She was methodically destroying the good man who was already there. She had moved from criticism to active deconstruction. She was proving her mother's theorem that a man like David could not withstand the demands of a Mitchell woman by ensuring he could not. Every withheld touch, every dismissed joy, every belittled dream was another brick removed from the structure of his love. She was the agent of her own prophecy, watching the walls crumble, mistaking the falling dust for the smoke of a fire that would never, ever come. The house was becoming unlivable, and she alone held the wrecking ball, swinging with a fervor she mistook for strength. The quiet end. There was no single, cataclysmic event. The end of a marriage built on mutual respect does not arrive with a thunderclap, but with the final, silent extinction of a light that has been fading for months. The atmosphere in the Victoria Island house had become a thin, frigid air, difficult to breathe. Conversations were logistical, stripped of warmth. The water bill came. The cleaner is coming Thursday. They moved around each other like satellites in decaying orbits, their paths intersecting only out of gravitational habit, not desire. The final evening began like any other. Amara was at the dining table, scrolling through her phone, immersed in the glittering digital stream of her mother's world. Images of a charity auction for a new children's hospital wing that Lux Africa was funding. David stood at the kitchen island, staring into a cup of tea as if the leaves held some answer he couldn't decipher. He looked at her, this woman he had loved with a certainty that once felt as fundamental as gravity. He saw the elegant slope of her neck, the fierce intelligence in her brow now permanently knitted with a critical tension. He saw the cold glint of the diamond panther bracelet, a shackle of a different value system, never removed. The woman who had once sketched dream homes with him on napkins was gone, replaced by a sleek executive evaluating his life's portfolio and finding it lacking. He took a slow, deep breath, the kind you take before stepping off a high dive. The tea steamed, forgotten. Amara. She didn't look up. We need to talk. Something in his tone, a finality, a bottomed-out calm, made her thumb pause on the screen. She put the phone down, face up, the glow illuminating her wary expression. Talk about what? He didn't move from the island. He didn't come to sit. The space between them felt like a chasm that could not be crossed. About this, he said, his voice soft but clear, encompassing the cold room, the separate lives, the library of unsaid hurts. About us. A flicker of the old Amara, the one who feared loss, sparked in her chest, but it was quickly smothered by the newer, harder persona. She crossed her arms. What about us? If you have a problem, David, you should say it. Don't just stand there being cryptic. He almost smiled then, a sad ghost of a thing. That's just it. I've been saying it. For months. In every way I know how. But I'm not speaking the right language anymore. He looked directly at her, his gaze unwavering, filled with a grief so profound it was peaceful. I don't recognize you anymore, Amara. The words should have been a blow. Instead, they felt like an accusation. Her defensiveness rose, hot and ready. What is that supposed to mean? Because I won't settle for a mediocre life? Because I have ambitions you don't understand. No, he said, and the quiet certainty in that single syllable stopped her. It's because the woman I married seems to be taking her cues from a ghost I can't fight. A ghost who whispers that my love is mediocre, that my respect is weak, that building a peaceful life is a small dream. He paused, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Your mother's ghost. Amara's breath caught. The truth, named so plainly, was shocking in its clarity. She scrambled for footing. Don't blame my mother for your shortcomings. She's only ever wanted what's best for me. I know she does, David said, and the compassion in his voice was worse than any anger. But her definition of best was forged in her own loneliness. And she is teaching you to build the same fortress that left her so empty inside. You are becoming her, Amara. And the terrible thing is, you think it's strength. The air left the room. All her rehearsed arguments, her catalogs of his failures, dried up in her throat. He saw. He had seen it all along. I love you, he said, the words simple, heavy, and utterly devastating. I love the woman who was my partner. But I cannot build a life with someone who has been told I am an enemy to be conquered or an asset to be appraised. I cannot live in a war zone where the battlefield commander is a memory of another woman's regret. He pushed the untouched tea away. I am laying down my arms. There is no fight left in me, not because I am weak, but because I will not fight the woman I love. And I cannot fight a ghost. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of an engine stopping for the last time. The hum of the fridge, the distant traffic, all of it faded into a white noise void. So what are you saying? Amara's voice was small, a child's voice. I am saying I want a divorce. He said it without malice, without theatrics. It was a statement of fact, as solid and unchangeable as a cornerstone. This is no longer a marriage. It is a haunting, and I need to leave this house. He didn't wait for a response. There was nothing more to say. He turned and walked slowly down the hallway to their bedroom, not with the slam of a door, but with the soft, definitive click of a latch engaging. Amara sat frozen at the table. The phone buzzed with a notification from the charity auction. She stared at it, the bright screen blurring. She had expected a fight. She had prepared for a confrontation where she could stand her ground, justify her stance, and either emerge victorious or provoke the glorious, passionate battle her mother promised was the mark of a real man. But this was a surrender, a quiet, dignified retreat from a field she had poisoned. He wasn't abandoning her. He was refusing to live in the toxic wasteland she had created. The victory she had been chasing was ashes in her mouth. There was no roar, only the echo of a profound, resounding silence where a loving heart had once beat. The quiet end was the loudest sound she had ever heard. The fortress of support. The call came at 11:17 p.m. Adesawa was not asleep. She was in her study, reviewing the liquidity reports for a potential acquisition, a small, innovative skincare lab in Cape Town. The muted chime of her private line was an interruption, but the caller ID made her heart perform a cold, triumphant somersault. Amara. She let it ring 3 times. Composed herself. When she answered, her voice was a velvet blanket of concern. Amara? NWAM, what is it? It's late. The sound on the other end was not words at first, but a raw, gulping sob that seemed to tear itself from her daughter's chest. Mama, David, the sentence shattered into incoherence. Adesawa closed her eyes, allowing herself a single, deep breath. The harvest was beginning. Show SHHH. Breathe. Just breathe. I'm coming. Right now. She didn't take the rolls. She took the less conspicuous Mercedes G-Wagon, her personal vehicle. Speed was of the essence, but so was the appearance of unvarnished, maternal urgency. She arrived at the Victoria Island house in under 20 minutes. The lights were on, blazing against the night, but the home looked wounded, its warmth leaking out into the dark. Amara opened the door, a shattered figurine in pajamas. Her eyes were swollen caverns, her body trembling with the aftershocks of seismic grief. She fell into her mother's arms, and Adesawa held her, smelling the familiar coconut oil in her hair, feeling the violent tremors. Over her daughter's shoulder, Adesawa's eyes swept the living room. It was a museum of their life, now frozen in its final, painful display. She felt not pity, but a fierce, possessive satisfaction. "It is done." He left. Amara choked out, the words muffled against Adesawa's silk blouse. "He said he wants a divorce. He just walked away." "Chinikme." Adesawa breathed, the perfect note of shock and outrage. She guided Amara to the sofa, holding her hands. "Walked away? From you? After everything you've built?" She shook her head, her expression a masterpiece of maternal fury. "It is the final proof, my love. The final, cowardly act. A real man, a strong man, would fight for a woman like you. He would move mountains, not run from a challenge. This just shows his true nature." Her words were a balm and a brand. They soothed the immediate sting of abandonment by recasting it as Amara's superiority. They branded David's dignified exit as the ultimate weakness. Amara latched onto the narrative like a lifeline, her sobs subsiding into hiccuping shudders. He said, I was listening to a ghost." "Your ghost?" Adesawa's eyes flashed, but with a calculated hurt, not guilt. Of course he would say that. He cannot face the reflection of his own inadequacy, so he blames the mirror. "He blames me for helping you see your own worth." "My darling, you have not lost a husband. You have shed a weight." The fortress building began immediately. Adesawa did not allow Amara a single night to wallow in ambiguity. She took charge. She called her personal assistant, issuing calm, crisp orders at 1 a.m. Send a team from the corporate security arm to David Ease's last known location, a friend's apartment in Acadia. Discreet, non-confrontational surveillance only. I want to know his movements. And have Kemi from legal draft the standard NDA and initial separation terms. My daughter's favor, of course. We'll review at 7. She made Amara pack a bag. "You are not staying in this monument to his failure. You are coming home with me." Home meaning the penthouse, the ultimate symbol of triumph over reliance on a man. By sunrise, Amara was installed in the penthouse's guest suite, a space more luxurious than most five-star hotel suites, but as personal as a showroom. Adesawa presided over breakfast on the terrace, the sprawling city below seeming to pay homage to their elevation. "This is not an ending, Amara. It is an upgrade. You have outgrown the container. Now you are ready for the palace." She mobilized her legal team, the sharpest minds money could buy. The divorce proceedings were not a negotiation. They were a surgical annexation. David, still reeling and wanting only a clean break, was presented with terms that were stunningly favorable to Amara. The house, the investments, a generous settlement. Adesawa's lawyers framed it not as greed, but as recognition of the lifestyle she has been accustomed to and the contributory value of her presence in his career. It was a masterstroke of financial gaslighting. David signed, his signature a final, weary act of severance. To seal the transformation, Adesawa whisked Amara away, not to a therapist, but to the Burj Al Arab in Dubai, a healing retreat. They spent days submerged in absurd luxury, gold leaf facials, private yacht trips along the Palm, shopping in boutiques where prices were not displayed. Adesawa lectured gently between spa treatments. "A man should be an addition to your kingdom, NWAM, not the foundation. Look at this. You earned this. Your name, your work, your spirit built this life. He was just a tenant in it." Amara, numb and emotionally bankrupt, began to parrot the doctrine. The sharp edges of her grief were slowly sanded down by the relentless, smooth pressure of her mother's worldview and the dizzying distraction of opulence. She posted pictures from the summit of the Burj, the vast blue of the Persian Gulf behind her. The caption, crafted with her mother's help, read, "New heights, new perspective, grateful for the clarity." Hashtag never settle, hashtag queen energy. The comments flooded in, full of fire emojis and supportive platitudes. No one asked about the pain. No one mentioned the good man she'd left behind. In this new, glittering narrative, David was not a loss. He was dead weight jettisoned before a glorious ascent. When they returned to Lagos, Amara moved not into her own space, but permanently into the guest wing of the Ikoyi penthouse. It was the final brick in the fortress. She was surrounded by every material comfort, insulated from want, and utterly, profoundly alone in a way the cozy chaos of her old home had never allowed. Her mother's support was a gilded cage, its bars forged from the very advice that had shattered her marriage. She had traded a partnership for a protectorate, and the loneliness she felt now was of a different, colder kind. The loneliness of a trophy on a shelf, polished and perfect, and gathering no warmth at all. The fortress was secure, and within its impregnable walls, Amara had never been more vulnerable. The calculated comfort. With Amara installed in the penthouse, a beautiful, brooding shadow in the guest wing, Adesawa allowed precisely 1 month of radio silence. She monitored David's movements through the discreet reports from her security team. He was staying with his friend, Deli, in Acadia. He went to work. He came home. He visited a quiet bar on Friday evenings, nursing a single beer. He was, the report stated, subdued but functional. He was grieving. Perfect. The strategy now shifted from demolition to acquisition. Amara had been the wrecking ball. Now Adesawa would position herself as the restorer. She needed to approach not as a predator, but as a fellow casualty, a wiser soul who had seen the error of her ways. She chose a Saturday afternoon. She knew from the reports that David did his grocery shopping at the high-end market in Lekki Phase 1 at this time, favoring the organic produce section. It was public enough to be casual, private enough for a conversation. She dressed not in her usual intimidating couture, but in understated, elegant linen trousers and a simple silk shell. She left the diamonds in the vault, wearing only a single strand of pearls and her wedding band from Tund, a subtle prop of continued, loyal widowhood. She looked like a graceful, sorrowful woman, not a billionaire titan. The encounter was orchestrated with the precision of a ballet. She turned her trolley into the aisle of imported cheeses just as he was examining a block of Gouda. She let her cart bump gently, almost apologetically, into his. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she began, then let her voice catch. "David." He looked up, and the shock on his face was genuine. He looked older, the lines around his eyes more pronounced, but his composure held. "Mrs. Mitchell." His voice was neutral, carefully polite. "Please, David. After everything, call me Adesawa." She let her gaze soften, taking him in with a look of pained sympathy. "How are you?" The question was weighted, implying a shared burden. A faint, tired smile touched his lips. "Getting by. And you?" "Worried," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential register. She glanced around as if wary of eavesdroppers. I know what you must think of me. And you have every right." She looked down at her hands on the trolley handle. "I have not been able to sleep, thinking of the pain my daughter has caused you. The pain I may have inadvertently contributed to." David's polite mask flickered. He hadn't expected contrition. "This isn't really the place, Mrs. MIT Adesawa." "You're right. Of course." She nodded, as if chastened. "It's just seeing you here. You look so," she trailed off, her eyes glistening with unshed tears she had perfected in boardrooms when playing for sympathy. "You look like a good man who has been deeply wronged. And it breaks my heart because I recognize that look. I saw it in the mirror for 20 years. It was the first hook, baited with shared regret." He remained silent, but he didn't walk away. "I failed Amara," she continued, her voice a raw whisper. "I was so afraid she would end up like me, lonely, having driven away a good man with her stubbornness and pride, that I taught her the wrong lessons. I taught her to see strength as domination. I taught her to mistake a peaceful heart for a weak one. She looked directly into his eyes, allowing her own vulnerability to show. It was her most potent weapon. I see now, too late, the catastrophic error. I lost Tun for the same reasons Amara is losing you. I was a fool. And in my foolishness, I made my daughter one. David leaned back against the chilled cheese cabinet, his arms crossed. The defensiveness was seeping out of him, replaced by a wary, desperate curiosity. Here was the architect of his pain, claiming to have the blueprint for her own. Why are you telling me this? Because someone needs to apologize to you, she said simply. And Amara, she is still too deep in the forest to see the trees. She is repeating my history, thinking it is her destiny. And I cannot stand by and watch another good man be destroyed by the Mitchell family's tragic flaw. A single, perfect tear traced a path down her cheek. She did not wipe it away. He was disarmed. The narrative of the vengeful, manipulative mother didn't fit this elegant, remorseful woman before him. This was a woman who understood his pain because she lived with its twin. It's not all on her, he said finally, a gruff concession to fairness. A marriage takes two, and a good man tries to hold it together even when one is pulling it apart, she countered gently. You did that. I know you did. I saw how you loved her. It was a reminder of something precious I had thrown away. She placed a hand lightly on his arm, a fleeting, sympathetic touch. I am so sorry, David, for my part in this. Truly, the hook was set. He gave a slow, heavy nod. Thank you for saying that. She withdrew her hand, sensing the delicate moment had reached its limit. I won't keep you, but if you ever need to talk, to someone who understands the unique bewilderment of loving and losing a Mitchell woman, she offered a sad, knowing smile. My door is always open. No agendas, just an old woman's regret and a listening ear. She pushed her trolley away slowly, leaving him standing amidst the cheeses, surrounded by the mundane reality of groceries, but plunged into a vortex of unexpected empathy. The first contact had been made. She had not presented herself as a rival or a meddler, but as an ally, a fellow survivor. She had apologized, not for sabotaging his marriage, but for her daughter's actions, a brilliant misdirection that painted her as a tragic, reformed figure. She had validated his pain and his goodness, and she had left him with an invitation, cloaked in the self-deprecating guise of an old woman's regret. As she drove back to the penthouse, a cool, analytical calm settled over her. Phase 1, demolition, was complete. Phase 2, strategic compassion, had just begun. The foundation for the new structure was being laid, not on the solid ground of shared values, but on the freshly turned, fertile soil of shared grief. And she was the master gardener, the forbidden sanctuary. The first text came a week later, late on a Tuesday night. Adesawa was reviewing the Cape Town lab acquisition, the figures blurring before her eyes. The chime was from her private, unlisted number. The message was simple, stripped of any greeting that might feel too familiar. David, you were right about the bewilderment. She stared at the words, a slow smile touching her lips. Not a smile of joy, but of cold, strategic satisfaction. The fish was nibbling the line. She waited 23 minutes, long enough to not seem eager, short enough to not seem dismissive. Adesawa, it is a uniquely lonely feeling. I'm sorry you're experiencing it. Can I help? Thus began the careful, incremental construction of the sanctuary. She became his confessor, a role she played with Oscar-worthy restraint. He would text short, pained observations. Saw a film she wanted to watch today. Walked out of the cinema. She would respond not with advice, but with mirrored understanding. The ghosts are in the mundane places. The supermarket, the cinema. They are the hardest to escape. She invited him, after 2 weeks of this digital communion, to something neutral, a public art exhibition at the Nike Center. It's on Alumo rock preservation. I thought of your work. No pressure, of course. It was a perfect lure, acknowledging his passion, offering a non-threatening, cultural space. He came. She saw him across the gallery, looking slightly lost amidst the sculptures and photographs. She approached quietly, a gentle smile on her face. "You made it." The conversation was easy, initially orbiting the art, then gradually, inevitably, spiraling inward. They found a quiet bench in a corner. He spoke in low, measured tones about the divorce proceedings, the surreal efficiency of her mother's lawyers, the hollow feeling of signing away a shared life. Adesawa listened, her body angled toward him in a posture of complete attention she rarely gave anyone. She nodded, her eyes soft with empathy. They are efficient because they see it as a transaction. They don't understand it was a universe. She placed her hand on the bench between them, not touching him, but an open, neutral space. Tund left me with a kettle, a bed, and a stack of engineering textbooks. The lawyers divided the assets, but no one divided the silence. That was all mine. He looked at her then, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. He saw not the intimidating billionaire, but a strikingly beautiful woman with ancient grief in her eyes, who spoke his language of loss. The contrast was dizzying. Amara had met his pain with defensiveness and a rehearsed lexicon of empowerment. Adesawa met it with a silent, knowing recognition. She began to perform the version of herself she knew he needed. The reformed shrew. The wiser, softer woman who had learned her lesson too late. She cooked for him, not in the penthouse, which was too imposing, but in a smaller, cozy pied-a-terre she kept in a koi, a space she'd never shown Amara. She made simple, comforting food, jollof rice, moi moi, presenting it without fanfare. I've had to relearn the joy of feeding someone without it being a negotiation, she said softly, setting a plate before him. She asked him about his heritage project, listening with a fascination that felt genuine. She asked intelligent, probing questions, championing his quiet passion in a way Amara had stopped doing months ago. "This is legacy work, David. This is what lasts. Buildings of steel and glass will fall. The memory in these old stones. You are preserving a soul." To David, heartbroken and floating in the formless void of his new life, Adesawa became an island. She was calm where Amara had been stormy. She was respectful where Amara had been dismissive. She offered admiration for the very qualities Amara had taught him to doubt. She created an atmosphere of peace, a sanctuary where he was not a failed provider or an emotional disappointment, but a valued, interesting man. The forbidden element was the secret fuel. They never spoke of Amara directly after those first conversations. Her presence was the ghost in the room, the shared, painful knowledge that bound them in a conspiracy of understanding. They were two people who had loved and been wounded by the same force, finding solace in each other's company. It felt, to his grieving heart, tragically poetic. One evening, after a dinner where they had talked for hours about everything from city planning to favorite childhood books, a comfortable silence fell. The Lagos rain hammered against the windows of the pied-a-terre, sealing them in a warm, private world. Adesawa was clearing the plates. As she passed his chair, she let her hand rest, for a brief, electric second, on his shoulder. Not a seductive gesture, but one of profound, wordless comfort. He looked up, caught in the lamplight, and she saw the conflict in his eyes, the gratitude, the loneliness, the dawning, terrifying awareness of the shift. "This," he started, his voice rough. "This is dangerous." She met his gaze, her own filled with a vulnerability that was her most calculated masterpiece. "I know," she whispered, "but after so long in the cold, isn't a little danger preferable to the certainty of frost?" She didn't wait for an answer. She walked to the kitchen, leaving him with the scent of her perfume and the echoing truth of her question. The sanctuary was no longer just a place of comfort. It had become a threshold, and she had just gently, irrevocably, guided him across it. The line between shared grief and something else had blurred, and in that blur, Adesawa saw the clear, sharp outline of her victory finally coming into focus. The society shocker. The news broke not with a gossip column whisper, but The ultimate acquisition. 3 months after the society announcement, the final, unassailable proof of conquest arrived. It was not in the form of a legal document or a property deed, but in the soft, telling curve beneath Odessa's couture. A second, discreet announcement was sent to a smaller, more exclusive list: close business associates, a few trusted family members, her personal medical team. The card was heavy ivory stock, embossed with the now-joined Mitchellese crest, a new creation that intertwined a cosmetic mortar and pestle with an architect's compass. With grateful hearts, we share the joyful expectation of new life. Baby Mitchellese arriving this fall. Your prayers and blessings are cherished. It was the ultimate acquisition, not just of the man, but of the future. Not just a marriage, but a dynasty reborn from the ashes of her daughters. At 51, Odessa was achieving the impossible, a biological and symbolic rebirth that eclipsed any material triumph. Amara learned of it not from her mother, but from Kimmy, the ever-efficient head of legal who had handled the divorce. Kimmy's voice, usually so detached and professional, held a faint, awkward tremor over the phone. Amara, I thought you should hear it from me before. Well, before it becomes more widely known. Your mother, she's asked us to update the trust structures. There's a pregnancy. The phone slipped from Amara's hand, thudding dully onto the plush carpet of her penthouse prison. She didn't pick it up. She stood in the middle of the vast, silent living room, her arms wrapping around her own empty stomach. A low, animal moan escaped her, a sound of pure, undiluted anguish. This was beyond betrayal. This was annihilation. Her mind, already a gallery of regrets, now filled with horrific, unwelcome images. David, his large, gentle hand resting on her mother's growing belly. David reading architectural plans aloud to her stomach, a ritual he'd once dreamed of doing for their child. Her mother, glowing not just with pregnancy, but with the smug, complete victory of having secured everything: the past, the present, and now the future. She had to see it. A self-destructive compulsion drove her. She had her driver take her to the Ikoyi Medical Center where she knew her mother's elite obstetrician was based. She waited in the back of the car, shaded by tinted windows, a ghost watching the living. And then she saw them. Odessa emerged first, radiant in a flowing, emerald green dress that did little to hide the elegant swell of her pregnancy. She looked younger, vibrant, her hand resting lightly on her abdomen. Then came David. He was holding the door, his focus entirely on her. He helped her into the passenger seat of his sensible SUV, the same car he'd driven during their marriage, with a tenderness that was intimate and practiced. He leaned in, saying something that made Odessa smile, a genuine, soft smile that transformed her face. Then, with a care that broke Amara's heart anew, he reached across and fastened her seat belt, his hand lingering for a moment over the curve of the life growing within her. The gesture was a masterpiece of mundane devotion. It was the protector, the caretaker, the husband in his purest form. It was the reverence Amara had been told to demand, but had been taught to scorn. And now, it was being lavished on the architect of her ruin. David walked around to the driver's side, his profile serious but content. As he started the car, he placed his hand on Odessa's thigh, a simple, possessive, comforting touch. They drove away, a picture of expectant, settled partnership. Amara slumped back into the leather seat, the world swimming. The final piece of the puzzle slammed into place. Her mother hadn't just wanted David. She had wanted the entire construct: the devoted husband, the peaceful home, the legacy of a child, the complete life she had forfeited with Tund and watched Amara carelessly discard. She hadn't just stolen a man, she had stolen a destiny. The pregnancy was the crowning jewel, the incontrovertible evidence that this was no fleeting affair or revenge plot. This was a new life, literally and figuratively. It cemented David permanently into her mother's world and rewrote the narrative entirely. Now, Odessa was not the villain who stole her daughter's ex-husband. She was the blessed older woman, the miraculous mother-to-be, and David was the steadfast partner standing by her. Amara was reduced to a footnote, the unstable ex-wife whose departure had made this blessed union possible. The loneliness that enveloped Amara in that moment was colder and more absolute than any she had ever felt. It was the loneliness of being obsolete. She had been used as the demolition crew to clear the land, and now, on that very land, her mother was building a palace and planting a garden, with the very man who should have been her cornerstone. The ultimate acquisition was complete. All that was left for Amara was the empty, echoing sight of her own destruction and the crushing knowledge that she had handed the blueprint to the wrecking ball herself. The digital ledger, the silence in the penthouse had become a physical entity. It pressed on Amara's eardrums, a high-pitched hum of nothingness. She wandered the cavernous rooms like a ghost in her own life, touching the cold marble surfaces, the untouched books, the art that screamed value but whispered no comfort. Her mother was rarely there now, busy building her new life, her new family, in the cozy pied-a-terre that had been the secret staging ground for the coup. One afternoon, driven by a desperate, morbid curiosity and the need to feel something other than hollow agony, Amara ventured into her mother's study. It was a sanctum she'd always respected, a place of power and strategy. Now, it felt like the enemy's war room. The massive rosewood desk was pristine. No papers, no clues. But on a side table, connected to a charger, sat an iPad Pro. It was the device Adesawa used for reading market reports and digital publications. Amara knew the passcode. It was her own birthday, a sentimental touch that now felt like a mockery. Her fingers trembled as she tapped in the numbers. The screen glowed to life. It was synced to her mother's iCloud. Her eyes scanned the icons. Bloomberg, FT, Lux Africa internal portal. Then she saw the Notes app. A cold, instinctive dread settled in her stomach. She opened it. The notes were a mix of business ideas, meeting memos, and personal reminders. Then she saw a folder titled AD, her own initials. She clicked. Inside was a digital ledger of her destruction. The first note was dated over a year ago, just after one of their early empowerment lunches. Lunch with A, successful, planted the seed of not settling. Framed Tun's departure as his weakness, not my error. She is receptive. D, remains the comfortable option. Must reframe comfort as mediocrity. Amara's breath hitched. She scrolled. Gave A, the Cartier Panther today. DS homemade gift now appears childish in contrast. Excellent. The language of value must be retaught. She must learn that sentiment is poor currency. A note from the weekend of the Paris trip. Paris gambit worked. A, chose spectacle over substance, the Ritz over his planned retreat. The distance between them is now geographical as well as emotional. He is confused. Good. Confusion is fertile ground. Then, the most clinical one, dated the week after David moved out. A, is broken but pliant. Installed in penthouse. Grief is useful. It creates dependency. Trip to Dubai booked. Need to reinforce narrative. She outgrew him. This is an upgrade. Legal team prepped for swift, favorable dissolution. Clean break essential for Phase 2. Phase 2. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs. She navigated to a new folder, simply titled Harvest. The notes here were shorter, more strategic. First contact made. Market. Apology framed as shared regret. Key. Validate his pain. Villainize ES actions, my teachings. Position myself as reformed, wiser. He is lonely. Vulnerability is an entry point. Dinner at pied-a-terre. Cooked simple meal. Performance of domestic humility successful. He sees the contrast. Yes, scorn versus my reverence. The pivot is beginning. And then, the note that made the blood drain from her face. It was a single line, written the day after the final, quiet argument in her old home, the one that had ended her marriage. A, has pushed him to the brink. The space is opening. His kindness is a resource. I will not make the same mistake twice. This harvest will be mine. The words, "this harvest will be mine," seemed to pulse on the screen, a cold, corporate mission statement written in the blood of her marriage. Amara dropped the iPad as if it had burned her. It clattered on the desk. It was all there. Not the emotional, messy story of a lonely mother's envy, but a clean, strategic blueprint. Her feelings, David's heart, their marriage, all were reduced to variables in a business plan. She was a controllable factor. David was D, a resource. Their love was the harvest. The sheer, dehumanizing calculation of it was worse than any crime of passion. Her mother hadn't just been giving bad advice in a twisted attempt to live vicariously or protect her. She had been conducting a hostile takeover. Amara's trust was the leverage. Her insecurities were the market weakness exploited. David's love was the asset to be acquired. The divorce was a necessary corporate restructuring. Every comforting word, every shared tear, every expression of regret from her mother had been a line in this digital ledger, a step in a plotted course. The fortress of support had been a holding cell. The healing retreat in Dubai was a debriefing session for a successfully concluded first phase. Amara stumbled back, clutching the edge of the desk. The polished, tasteful room spun around her. The truth was not a bitter pill. It was a surgical blade, cold and sharp, laying her soul bare. She hadn't been a daughter making mistakes. She had been a pawn, a useful idiot. Her heartbreak, her loneliness, her regret, they weren't tragic consequences. They were projected outcomes, accounted for in the strategy. The digital ledger didn't just reveal the plot, it revealed the plotter's soul. And in that soul, Amara found no love, no misguided maternal instinct, only the chilling, precise arithmetic of acquisition. The most valuable thing she had ever possessed had been appraised, devalued, and seized, and she had handed over the keys to the vault, believing she was being taught to be queen. She had been the mark in her mother's most brilliant, most terrible con. The hostile takeover. The final understanding settled into Amara's bones not as a storm, but as a permanent, glacial winter. The shattering rage that followed the discovery of the digital ledger had burned itself out, leaving behind a clarity as cold and sharp as diamond. There were no more tears. Her eyes, when she caught her reflection in the penthouse's endless windows, were dry and ancient, like river stones worn smooth by a torrent of pain that had finally passed. She stood at her usual post, looking down at the city. But she no longer saw the glittering diorama of ambition. She saw a complex, brutal market, and her mother was its most ruthless traitor. The pieces of the last 2 years rearranged themselves in her mind, no longer a tragic story of failed relationships, but a chilling case study in corporate rating. Asset identification. Adesawa had identified an undervalued asset with high intrinsic value, David's capacity for loyal, respectful partnership. Market analysis. She assessed the current holder, Amara, as inexperienced, emotionally volatile, and susceptible to influence from a major shareholder, herself. Strategic devaluation. Through a sustained campaign of misinformation and psychological manipulation, the advice, she artificially devalued the asset in the eyes of the holder, creating dissatisfaction and friction. Forcing a divestment. By encouraging operational dysfunction, the disrespect, the arguments, she made the asset's environment untenable, forcing the holder to divest under distressed conditions. Acquisition at low cost. Once the asset was distressed and available, David, heartbroken and alone, she moved in, presenting herself as a stable, appreciative alternative. She acquired the asset with minimal upfront cost, just performances of empathy and contrition, and integrated it into her own portfolio. Value extraction and synergy. She then leveraged the asset to generate new value. The pregnancy, the public image of a triumphant second chance, creating synergy with her existing brand, the powerful, timeless woman who gets everything she desires. Amara had not just lost a husband. She had been the subject of a meticulously executed, emotionally devastating hostile takeover. Her heart had been the company raided. Her trust was the board of directors, infiltrated and neutralized. Her marriage was the profitable subsidiary stripped and absorbed. She thought of her mother's words, now stripped of their velvet and revealed as cold steel. Never settle for less. It wasn't a feminist mantra, it was a raider's credo. It meant, identify the highest valued target and take it, regardless of collateral damage. Don't give your respect too freely. Translation: withhold goodwill to weaken the target's defenses. A man must earn it. Meaning, keep the asset in a state of striving, of proving its worth, so it remains pliable and grateful for acquisition. The ultimate lesson, the one seared into her soul, was this. In the economy of human relationships as her mother understood it, sentiment was a liability. Love was a vulnerability to be exploited in others and weaponized in oneself. The only true currency was control. The view from the penthouse was no longer a kingdom. It was the observation deck of the victor's tower, and she was not the victor. She was a casualty kept on display, a warning and a testament to the victor's power. She lived in the spoils of a war she hadn't known she was fighting. A soft chime echoed through the silent space. A notification on the tablet she'd left face down on the sofa. With numb fingers, she picked it up. It was a news alert from a society blog. A grainy but happy photo taken at a charity event the previous night. Adesawa, radiant in a flowing gold gown that elegantly accommodated her pregnancy, one hand resting on her stomach. David stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, looking down at her with an expression of protective, solemn devotion. The caption read, "Power Couple Goals. Billionaire mogul Adesawa Mitchell-Lees and architect husband David Shine at Future Hearts Gala, expecting their first child together. Hashtag second chance, hashtag love wins." Amara didn't throw the tablet. She didn't scream. She simply placed it back on the sofa, the click of it meeting the cushion, the only sound in the vast room. Love wins. The final, grotesque twist of the narrative. Her mother had not just taken her life, she had rewritten its story. In the public eye, Adesawa was the heroine of a redemptive romance. Amara was the prologue, the necessary conflict overcome to reach the happy ending. She walked away from the window. There was nowhere to go, but she could not stand at the glass anymore. The hostile takeover was complete. The raider had secured the asset, rebranded the company, and was now launching a lucrative new product line. The original holder was left with nothing but the debt of regret and the hollow, echoing shell of a headquarters she never meant to build. Amara Mitchell, daughter of the raider, heiress to an empire of loneliness, finally understood the core principle of her inheritance. In the pursuit of more, you could become less than nothing. And the most valuable things could not be acquired. They could only be given and received in trust. A truth her mother had learned too late for herself, and had made sure Amara would learn only after it was far, far too late for her, too. The deal was done. The books were closed. All that remained was the infinite quiet of the aftermath. The scandal, as all scandals in Lagos do, eventually faded from the front pages of newspapers and the tips of society's tongues. It was replaced by newer gossip, fresher weddings, more dramatic corporate falls. Life, in its relentless way, moved on. Adesawa Mitchell-Lees gave birth to a healthy baby boy, Chike, who was featured in a tasteful, exclusive photo spread in today's Woman magazine. The article spoke of late-in-life blessings, the power of resilience, and building a legacy of love on a foundation of hard-won wisdom. David was pictured in the background, a quiet, devoted figure in a sun-drenched nursery, the very portrait of a contented man. The palace was built, the garden was growing. Amara left the penthouse. She could no longer bear to be a resident in the monument to her own defeat. Using a small, separate trust left by her father, one even her mother could not touch, she bought a modest, sun-filled flat in Yaba. It was noisy, chaotic, and alive. She could hear her neighbors arguing, children playing football in the courtyard, and the sizzle of akra from the street vendor every morning. The silence was gone. She resigned from her symbolic role at Lux Africa and started her own small, independent architecture firm with a friend. They focused on sustainable, affordable housing. The work was hard, the profit margin slim, but it was hers. She no longer spoke to her mother. The cord had been cut, not with drama, but with the finality of a surgical separation. There were no more lunches, no more calls. They were ghosts to each other, haunting parallel lives. Sometimes, in her quietest moments, Amara would think of David, not with the burning jealousy of before, but with a profound, aching sorrow for the love they had both lost, a love that had been genuine before it was used as a weapon. She hoped, in a distant part of her heart, she was still learning to forgive, that he had found some measure of the peace he deserved, even if the cost had been her entire world. She learned a new language, one not of valuation and acquisition, but of quiet integrity, of building something real and lasting, brick by honest brick. The loneliness was still there, but it was no longer the gilded, echoing kind. It was a human loneliness, one that held space for healing and perhaps, one day, for a trust that could be given without fear of it becoming a ledger entry. The story of Adesawa, Amara, and David became a whispered cautionary tale, a stark reminder that the most dangerous battles are not fought in boardrooms or for fortunes, but in the quiet spaces of the heart, where advice can be a weapon and love can be the prize in a game only one player knows they're playing. Thank you for reading. This story explored the dark shadows of family, envy, and the terrible cost of confusing manipulation for love. If this tale moved you, made you think, or sparked a conversation, please share it with friends and family. Like this story if you appreciated the journey, and let us know in the comments what lessons resonated with you the most. Remember, the truest strength often lies not in taking what you want, but in cherishing and protecting what you already have. Stay tuned for more compelling stories. Subscribe for updates.